I'm Doug Osgood. I'm Associate Pastor here at Jesse Lee. Dorothy Lockwood is the longest member of Jesse Lee Church, living in this region and in this town for most of her life. And Caroline Nazworth and John Gillaugh have stepped forward and have worked out some questions in collaboration to visit with Dorothy and gather some of her memories, her insights, and her vision. It's living memory. It's the narrative of her life that we are to explore a bit. And so we celebrate this opportunity in sharing.
Dottie, thank you very much for taking the time to talk with us today. So our first question for you is, how long have you lived in Ridgefield?
I came here in 1950 as a child bride, married in the old church in the center of town, right on the corner of Katona and Main Street, where the the Carnell Insurance Building is. It's a nice big white church. Looked huge to me when I first started, of course.
Dottie, would you mind telling us back in the 50s what Sunday school and church was like?
Sunday school was downstairs. I know when my father brought me, we had to walk down the stairs, and they had sectioned off this large room with petitions for the different classes. And it wasn't a big Sunday school like it is now, of course. And we had very nice teachers. I remember one gentleman I had, 5th grade, Mr. McKeon, and Mrs. Myers. And I went all through Sunday school. I got one of those beautiful certificates for 10 years attendance, perfect attendance, from 8 to 18. So I went away to school.
In your childhood, tell us a little bit about your childhood.
Well, I was born in Norwalk at home, and my parents moved to Wilton when I was 3. I have an older brother and 2 younger brothers. I had a very nice childhood. My mother was deaf. She slowly became deafer as she grew older, so we were used to that. We didn't sign or anything with us. We had our own sign language. But she always had to watch us. Her eyes had to be her ears. When we were outside playing, she had to be there. She couldn't be in the house. And loving parents, but never parents that held us and hugged us, and I think that's why I'm a hugger and a kisser today.
So what do you remember about what Main Street looked like, and how has it changed?
Well, the main thing I'd say was the traffic. We only had about 50% of the traffic that we have now. And the stores seemed to me were more stores that you could go in and shop and buy something or buy food, and now it seems to be real estate and liquor stores. And it seems very busy now, very busy.
Dottie, the church moved from downtown to its present location here on Main Street. Do you remember any of the things that happened at that time?
When we came here, we had our services in Wesley Hall, in the main foyer, I guess you'd call it, in that room that has the bay window that looks out on that would be the south side, wouldn't it? That's where we had our altar up there where the bay windows are. And it would push back out into the foyer. Of course, we didn't have as big a membership, and what a big undertaking. And I don't know if I ever told you about the time that when I was teaching once, at this time David was just a little guy. He wasn't in school yet, so he must have been around 4 or 5. I had come into Wesley Hall to get some material for Sunday school, and we were coming out, and Reverend Powell, Walter Powell, was the pastor, and he was out on the front lawn with this great big crate. There was a huge crate laying in the grass, and they were opening it up with the crowbars and taking out all the alfalfa and everything, and he motioned us over, and he said to David, he said, "You see this cross?" He says, "It's going way up there today. Would you like to touch it? Because we're going to put it up there. It's the last time you'll be able to touch it." So he touched it and looked at it. It's a huge big cross out there. And the machinery was coming that day to hoist it up to the steeple. And it stayed up there all these years until, what was it, just a year or so ago they took it down. Now it's out in the garden. I told David he can go touch it again. He was so impressed with that. He told his daddy all about it. He saw the cross. So every time we'd drive by, he'd look up at it, you know.
So Dottie, what Ridgefield traditions do you participate in? What's something that you've been doing for a really long time and that you do every year?
Well, we always look forward to the parade. And when my children were home, we used to walk up from Soundview. If the weather was good, we walked up and usually always stayed mostly in the front of the community center. It's when the parade used to go all the way through town, so sometimes we would watch it when I came back.
Dottie, were you married to Jesse Lee?
Yes. And very interesting story. When Harry was in the service, and he had a long weekend, and we had planned on getting married in August, and then found out that our usual minister was going to be away on vacation. So we got the substitute minister, and his name was Reverend Brian. And talking to him, we found out that his father was Dr. Brian, who delivered my father. And my father is named Brian, after the doctor. She had a big family, and so this was her baby, and she named him after the doctor whose son married Harry and I.
When did you meet him, and when did you get married?
I met him at Youth Fellowship at Jesse Lee. It was downstairs where we used to meet, and I remember coming with my girlfriend Marion from Wilton, who was also married in Jesse Lee, and longtime friend Marion Baxter. And we came down the stairs, and they were having like recreation first before they started the meeting. And here he was playing ping pong with Whitford Baxter, who turned out to be Marion's husband. And the way he played, I thought, my first impression is, doesn't he think he's hot stuff? You know, and I realized he was kind of showing off, you know. So he said that when he first saw me, he thought, well, I'm going to get to know that girl. And so he went home and he asked his grandparents if he was blood related to a Dorothy Scott from Wilton. And because there was a Scott in the Lockwood family. And she said, no blood relation. He thought, oh, that's good. So we started dating, and we're married there in 1950. I think I knew him since I was 15, and I was only 20 when we were married.
You mentioned that Harry was in the service and that he came home to be married. What was he doing in the service?
He was sent, and that's another reason we wanted to marry, because he knew his orders were coming, and he was going to be sent to Korea. And that was prolonged, for maybe 6 or 8 months. Anyway, long enough for me to become pregnant. And I had Linda, my firstborn, in 1952, when Harry was in Korea. Very bad time of the war. It's when hundreds were dying. And I remember making a promise, as some foolish people do, make a promise to God, if he ever sent him home to me, that I would try to be the best person I could possibly be. I made that promise.
Dottie, what was your favorite thing to do when you were younger?
Well, I mentioned my girlfriend Marion. She lived about 2 miles down, further down 33. That's where I lived. Very close to where I live now. Just into Wilton I lived. I used to, one Saturday I would walk to her house if the weather was good, and the next Saturday she would come to mine. And it was just playing with Marion. We loved to get film for our camera and take pictures. And just silly, girly things, you know. We would take pictures of us in our bathing suits at different poses and la-di-da stuff. And she was my pal. Couldn't have been any closer if she had been my sister. She was the youngest in her family, so all her sisters were grown, so I was close for her too. It was about my favorite thing.
How do you suppose being a teenager in Ridgefield today is different from when you were a teenager?
Well, when I was a teenager, the kids, especially the boys, all three of my brothers, they worked. They had a Saturday job and sometimes an after-school job and sometimes like a paper route and stuff. Kids all had a job and they worked Saturdays. You never saw them hanging out on the streets or anything. They were working and riding their bicycles. And when they wanted a car, or thought they needed a car, they had to buy it themselves. whereas nowadays you don't see kids working like that.
Dottie, I understand that you were a nurse. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yes, I went into nurses training right after high school, went up to Yukon for my science courses, biologies and that, stuff like that, and then started at the hospital. And went through all the different services. The emergency room was exciting, but what I got my best mark in was the OR. And it was a hard time for a lot of the kids. They didn't like to be a scrub nurse for some of the different surgeons who were terrible. You know, if you didn't get that instrument to them just like that, they'd throw it across the room. And, you know, and the kids, sometimes they would get diarrhea. They were so upset to scrub for this Dr. Abrams. And I thought, well, now, he said, now, if you don't have the instrument, speak up. I thought, okay. And of course, the only thing they could see was your eyes. So they didn't really know who they were talking to. And we were doing this mastectomy one day, and we ran out of the little hemostats, the small little clamps that you use at the beginning of the surgery. And he asked for another one, and they were all gone. And I gave him the next Kelly clamp, the next size, and he says, "That's not a hemostat." Across the room. And I said, "We're all out." "Well, that's what I like. Speak up." And ever since then, we were friends. I loved that service, the OR, and I was asked to come back after I graduated. But by then, I was pregnant with Linda, and I was settled pretty much in my marriage. Harry was home. She was 6 months old when he came home. It was an exciting time because I had a nice picture of him in his uniform with all his paraphernalia here. And I would say, "Daddy," and I'd point to the picture, and I'd say, "Daddy." So every time I said "Daddy," she'd look at the picture. Well, when he came home, this wonderful time that I put her in his arms, and of course she was fascinated with all this stuff here. And I said to her, "Daddy," and she's looking at the picture, and he's holding her. It was priceless.
After your children were raised and you were no longer a nurse in the hospital, I understand you cared for others. Could you speak to that?
Well, I took care of the vice president, Henry Wallace. Took care of him over on his farm over here in South Salem. And he had Lou Gehrig's disease, and he was keeping a journal for his doctors. He wrote in it every day. If he noticed a little more weakness in his left arm or something, everything was written down. And he couldn't speak, but we had one of those little eraser things that the kids have. You know how you write, and then you take up the page and it erases it with a little stick. And he would think nothing of like 3 o'clock in the morning. He would ring his little bell, and I'd go in and see what he wanted, and he wrote down SHAVE ? He wanted to know if I wanted to shave him 3 o'clock in the morning. He was awake. He figured it was time for a shave. And he was very interesting. And Mrs. Wallace wrote me the nicest little thank you note you could ever get. She was so appreciative of all us girls.
So, aside from the traffic that you mentioned earlier, what else is different about Ridgefield today?
I don't know. It seems to be an awful lot, maybe because of the traffic, an awful lot of hustle and bustle. And I don't think people are as friendly as they used to be. Maybe it's me not being that friendly either, because everybody's almost like a stranger. I mean, you used to know, not everybody, but many people on the street you would know. Not anymore.
What are your favorite things to be involved in Ridgefield?
Well, I enjoy our Bible study. And sometimes I try to help Carol out with her sewing. Deborah Circle, right? Very fond of Deborah Circle, especially our leader, Sue. And it's a nice bunch of ladies, really a nice bunch of ladies. That's what I like most. And then going to church every Sunday and seeing my friends. And getting a good message from Bill.
Francis Martin was very strong at the time of the church move. Could you tell us a little bit about Francis and his activities?
Well, you know, he was the type of man that either you liked him or you didn't. And my husband, for some reason, liked him. He used to do jobs for him, work for him and everything. I think he was a very generous man, but unusual too. I think near the end, if you remember, there was pictures of him in the paper where he had invited all these different people up to his home. And these were all people that were going to benefit from his will. And he was more or less giving him the money or whatever. He was going to leave them then. And he had made the remark that he wanted to see the enjoyment of them now. After he died, who knew? And I thought that was unusual, to let them all know ahead of time what he was giving them. And I think Doris, I don't know if it was she or he, that told everyone that she had the first, I don't know if it was an electric stove or gas stove in Ridgefield. She was the first one to have one of those. She was a sweet lady. She sang in the choir. I used to sing in the choir then. That was another thing. I used to sing in the choir when I was a young girl. And she had a sweet voice. Doris was very nice. But he was a very generous man and always greeting people at the church. Is a big influence. Mm-hmm.
What's something you would like everyone to know about Ridgefield?
Well, I think so much that they have to offer now, like the playhouse. And then the ice rink is nice for the kids. And all the athletics that they have for the kids now. I think it's great. I'm always glad to see at the holiday time the flags out. I think we've always been a very patriotic town. We get that flag, especially the big one on the town hall, but the ones along the street. And I always thought, well, that's nice. We have a lot of veterans. We did have a lot of veterans here, Foreign War. I knew Harry belonged. The American Legion. That's, John knows. Yeah. I think we've kept that spirit.